Okay, so if we've got to this section, really well done. We're now going to have a look at how to assemble our Maglite. You'll see that I've actually created a couple more folders just to keep things really organised. So in my parts, I've got all the parts that I've created. I've also created some assemblies where I'm going to keep all my assemblies, and the seals where all the rubber seals are. To do that, you just click plus, create the folder, and then you just drag each part where you want them to be. So we're going to go into assemblies. Now you've actually already created at least one assembly where you created the end cap with the rubber in it, and you may have created the main body and put the rubber seal in there as well. So we're just going to rename these. We call that end cap assembly, and we call this one here main body assembly, and we can do a few different assemblies and then we can bring the assemblies together, which is actually a little bit simpler than doing everything at once. So we're going to click plus, and we're going to click create assembly, and then we're going to rename this as bulb housing assembly. Now you'll notice when you open an assembly, if you've done this before, that there's nothing in here. There's no planes or like front, right or top, and that's because this is a bit like a vacuum of space. There's nothing in here whatsoever. If we click on insert, you'll see a list of the parts. Now if your computer's anything like mine, it actually cuts off at the bottom, but we can always search for the part, and then that'll bring up the parts that we want to. So as long as we've called them something that we can remember, we can search for them. We can insert parts, and we can also insert assemblies, and we've got our two assemblies we've done so far here. So at the end, we're going to create one master assembly where we bring our assemblies together. For this particular assembly, we're going to bring the bulb housing, the lens cap, the reflector, and then the seals that we need for that all together. So I'm going to start by the lens cap, and you'll see we can change anything in this assembly afterwards. So I'm just going to tick that. So you can see my lens cap there is the wrong colour, but if I go into my parts and I go to the lens cap, I can simply go edit appearance, as you'll know what to do by now, change the colour, and when I go back into my assembly, I go into my bulb housing assembly, you can see it's changed the colour. Now that includes if we change any sizes or dimensions, we can then go back and we can update this, which is a really useful tool to make sure everything fits. So what I need to do, the first thing I need to do is the first part, I'm going to right click and I'm going to fix it in place. And you'll see a little symbol up here comes, which is part is fixed. Now the reason for that is when if I try and move parts together and both parts can move, they're not fixed down as if they're clamped together, then they can actually just move apart from one another, which is really annoying. So if we just fix that part, we alleviate that problem. So the next part to bring in is the lens. So I'm going to bring the lens. Now if you've built it in the same way I have, then the lens will be exactly the right, so this lens can simply sit up inside there. However, if yours is at 90 degrees to this, so we can change the degrees quite easily with that tool. So if I click on it, I can change the angle. And that's also the same if I change to that direction. I could also change it in that direction. So if yours is facing the wrong way, just simply get it in the right direction. Now up here we've got some things called some mates. And a mate is basically mating two things together, bringing two things together. So we need to get this top surface to sit just underneath this lip here. So to do that, I'm going to use what's called a planar mate, which is that one there. And if I hover over the top of the lens, you'll see it automatically snaps to the middle, which is really useful. If I went on the bottom, it would automatically snap to the bottom of the part. So click once, and what that will do, I had to actually click twice for some reason, it will then highlight that I'm going to move this surface, and it's asking me what surface I want to go to. So I'm then going to select this here. You can see it automatically brings up a symbol there showing me I've got the middle. Click, and then I'm going to tick that. So that's my lens in place, but we want to check it's in the right place. So what we can do is use our translucent tool, and I can see that the top of that lines up perfectly inside and there's no overlap, which means that's correct. So that's great. Now we're going to insert our lens, you can just see it there, lens rubber seal. I believe this is the one that I made yellow. You tick that. Again, if it's in the wrong orientation, you'll just need to click on it and change that orientation. So this here is going to sit just below that lens there. Now I'm going to use a PlanyoMate as well. I'm going to hover and click, and then I'm going to hover below the lens and click. Now this time, if I look at the translucent, because that was a completely round surface, I actually selected the middle between the two. So if I have a look here, we can see they overlap, and they overlap exactly half. Now what I can do is I can go into my seals, find the lens rubber seal, and just learn its diameter. So it's 0.8 in diameter, and at the moment it's halfway too far up. So if I select 0.4, I go back into my assembly here and double click this PlanyoMate, which is the one we're working on. I need to move that down by 0.4. Now we can see down is the Z axis, Z is up and down. So if I go here and click on offset, it will ask me, and if I change that to 0.4, you can see it just hopped down. So if I click the tick, we can see that rubber seal is now sat exactly where it needs to be. So that's great. So far, so good. So logically, you might think that the next part to bring in would be the reflector. But actually what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring in the bulb housing first, and that will become more apparent in a minute. So there's the bulb housing. You can see I actually got my colours a little bit wrong, and this part here actually sits over the top here and in and rests on this surface here. So that whole thing comes over the top. So what I need to do, I'm going to get my PlanyoMate. I'm going to grab that surface there, and we can see it grabs the middle. So I click, and then I want to line that up with either one of these two, because there's a slight ridge there, and we can see it's moved it across. I can tick that, and again, if I go to translucent, now things are starting to get slightly more complicated now, but you can see the bulb housing is actually sat exactly where it needs to be, and there's no overlaps whatsoever as it sits in there. So that's great. Again, so far so good. Now there's two parts left. There's a seal that sits just inside here, and there's a reflector that sits on the top there. Now you might think, if I go back to being shaded, there's now not an easy way to actually get into there. But what we can do is, if we go over to here, we can actually hide different parts that we don't want to see. So we're now left just with the bulb housing. I can then insert my reflector, and And this is an example of where actually I've built it in the wrong orientation. But that's not the problem. All I've got to do is flip it by 180 degrees. So I can click on it, start to drag, let go, change it to 180 degrees, and then click off the part. So this reflector is going to sit just on this surface here with the bottom edge there. So I'm going to use a Planiumate again. Either one of these two will do off that bottom edge, and you can see it's already grabbed the middle. Click, select it there, tick, and we just want to make sure we're happy with it. So again, we can go translucent. Now as the part builds up, it starts to get more complicated, but we can see that sat on that edge there. And if we stay in translucent and we start to add our parts back in, we can see that the rubber seal is sat exactly where it needs to be. The reflector's where it needs to be. There's the lens, and then there's the end cap. So that's great. So far, so good. So that's the bulb housing assembly now built up with all of those parts.